Are.
Hello, Carl. How are
Hi,
you?
Nancy. Good,
Right.
good. Good to see
Good.
you. It's good to see everybody that I can't see beyond that.
Exactly. I know. I know. Well, just to set up a little bit, we're so pleased to have you here to talk about Wrecker. Um, there are several things you can count on in a Hiaasen book. You will be in Florida. You will snort laugh. There will be some outlandish crime, and the criminals will get what's coming to them in very satisfying ways. In Wrecker, I definitely laughed, but I also cried, Carl, which is new. The story takes place in Key West, so you might guess that the criminals in this book are smugglers. Our hero is Valdez Jones, who calls himself Wrecker because he's incredibly proud of his great, 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 great grandfather. I think I got the right number of greats, who salvaged shipwrecks for a living. So it's ironic when Wrecker comes upon a speedboat run aground on a sand flat. The men in the boat do not want him to call for help. In fact, they will pay him to forget that he ever saw them. And so begins this kid's entanglement with a very timely smuggling operation. And the fun of this book, of course, is seeing how he manages to untangle himself and tie the crooks in knots instead. Carl, this book paints such a vivid portrait of Key West, both past and present. Can you talk about like what made you want to set a book there?
Well, it's always been a sort of a legendary hangout for smugglers and outlaws going back a couple hundred years, and it's literally the end of the highway now. And when you drive to the end of US 1, mile marker 0 is in Key West, and I've spent a lot of time in the Keys. I used to live down there, and it still has. It's changed a lot, but it still has layers of intrigue to it. And I to put myself in the mind of a kid that actually is growing up there and has that kind of a legacy, because it was a town that at one point had the highest per capita income of anywhere in the United States. Went back when wrecking was in full boom, because the ships come ashore and everyone hops in the boat and you go out, and the wreckers got to keep a percentage of what was in the boat. And most of the time it wasn't gold, it was bales of cotton and things, but it was brutal, hard, grueling work. And they're doing it in the middle of storms, sometimes hurricanes. So it has a lot of, that always intrigued me, that part of Key West, and the legacy that lived on with the rum runners, and then the marijuana smugglers, and then it was cocaine, and it just, it's always something in transit down there. And I spent a lot of time there, and I just like the place. It's probably one of the most colorful places in Florida, I would say.
That's saying a lot. I know. Your books, often have kind of a ripped from the headlines elements to them. And in this book in particular, there's COVID, and also an interesting storyline about how the islanders tried to ban some of the really huge cruise ships from docking there, only to have that ban kind of overturned by feckless politicians. And I remember all of this was playing out as you were writing the book.
As I was writing it, yeah, it was kind of a moving target, because one of the things that has changed so much about Key West, for anyone who hasn't been there, is they've started allowing these giant cruise liners in. It's a fairly small harbor, and in docking these things, they turn around, and when they do, this huge swath of mud is created because they draw so much water, and the mud washes over the reefs and the coral and the flats, and it's terrible for the environment. So the people who live there have been fighting this for years. The people, because the cruise ships pull up in the morning, these people get out, they walk around, they get a rum runner and buy a t-shirt, and then they go back to the boat and get drunk. It's not necessarily a kind of tourism that they want. I mean, they want families to come, they want people who stay in the hotels and go to the restaurants and everything. So there was a lot of reasons they didn't want it, and the city had two referendums, one not long ago. They overwhelmingly voted to restrict the size and the frequency that these ships come in, and then our governor signed a piece of legislation that nullified basically the entire election, because he said that they passed a law saying that municipalities can't regulate their own ports or decide what comes in and out of their port. And the bill was sponsored by someone who doesn't have cruise ships coming into their port. And just as, I'm sure this is just a coincidence, but Governor DeSantis received his PAC received $1 million contribution from the owner of the main cruise ship terminal in Key West shortly before the legislation was signed. I'm sure there was no connection at all between those two events. So, but the people there were still upset, and they did little flotillas and protests. They've done everything they could to make democracy stick, and so that's a subplot, because that's a real thing. And it's still, the battle is still going on down there over this.
Yeah, I know. I love, all the things that come up in your books that I'm like, that seems like a stretch, and you're like, no, that part's real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The really sick parts are the real parts.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I know. I think what I loved about this book especially is that you're bringing in history more than I've seen you do before. Like, I love the wreckers, who are our heroes' ancestors. And then, spending so much time in the graveyard, which we should talk about, gave you a really good way to kind of bring in a lot of the, tragic history about Manuel Cabeza and the KKK.
And a lot, when I'm writing in the book, I did spend a lot of time in not in daytime, not nighttime, but and they have some very famous tombs and war heroes and other characters who are buried in the Key West Cemetery on Solaris Hill. And so I just walk around taking notes and looking up some of the things, but it's still a graveyard, but it's like a major tourist attraction, and they have little roads throughout the graveyard. So you'll see like an Uber pull up and tourists get out to take a picture of a tombstone, which doesn't happen at that many cemeteries. But one of the persons who's buried in this graveyard was a fellow in real, true life. He was lynched in Key West back in the 1920s, and this was at a time when the Ku Klux Klan ran the whole city. Everybody, almost virtually everybody in power, was a member of the Klan, and it was a racial lynching at a time when, believe it or not, a lot of people don't know this, but there was a period in the early 1920s when Florida had more lynchings of that kind than anywhere in the country, more than Alabama, more than Mississippi.
Wow.
And people don't know that. It doesn't get advertised a lot. But this happened at the height of that fever, that Klan's power. And interestingly enough, only a few years later, they were completely, more or less vanquished. They went underground. But at the time, it was very open. And so that's another subplot, is that the Valdez, the main character in the book, stumbles into the backstory of what happened to this guy, and then is drawn into the present time with the same story. And it is tragic, but it really happened. I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to Key West, is that there's so much history that it's almost impossible to write a book set down there where you aren't stumbling over it here and there, because it does shape the way that the city is now, as different as it is. But it's a small island. It's about 4 square miles, and it's not growing in the sense that there's really nowhere else to build anything. So you have all the old houses, and the geography is almost the same as it was 150 years ago in terms of the streets and all that. But that made it kind of fun too.
Yeah, I know. I think it is because it has, Key West has such a laid back vibe right now, as you think of it as the most relaxed place in the country. So it is, realizing some of the history, I think, was pretty eye-opening. And for your characters as well, I think Wrecker's surprised when he, reads about this, and, the girl he meets, Willie, has her own connections too.
And the families, there's still a lot of very old line, what we call comp families, or if you're in Key West, Bubbas. They've come from generations of, and they all came from somewhere else. Many of them from the Bahamas, many of them from up the eastern seaboard, when the wrecking trade. This is before steamships, so these are boats under sail, and they couldn't navigate as quickly if they saw a reef at night. I mean, they just crashed into the reef, and there was no lighthouse system in place in that period of time. So all of that is very intriguing, but you also have to appreciate how tough they were to get through it and have generations of them, because it was a very, very hard way to make a living. But my introduction to Key West as a journalist, when I was working for the Herald at I'm dating myself, but I think it was 1979. We did a series down there. We went and rented a house down there. It was called Smuggler's Island, and it was about how the marijuana trade had pervaded every element of Key West society, but also the institutions, state attorney's office, courts. Everything was, and in those days, that was before cocaine. So marijuana smugglers were basically fishermen, had fishing boats, and they had a chance to make $10,000 in cash in one night to go pick up a load of weed and bring it in, because at night it's still tricky to navigate down there. And it had really taken over the whole town in the sense of everybody knew a smuggler. If they weren't living with a smuggler or married to a smuggler, dating a smuggler, they knew a smuggler. Their dad was, or their brother was. And that was just, that was the time. And that's over now, but I still sure there's plenty of illicit cargo going in and out of that town now.
Yes, and you've invented some new interesting illicit cargo coming in that Valdez has to.
Yeah, we won't give it away, but yeah,
no, exactly.
It's something very valuable for its time, and he's not sure what to do with it. But I still go down there a lot just for fun and for the fishing and for the memories of when I was a kid, and we used to go to the Keys all the time. But I just thought it would be a great story to tell. Just to, as a kid, all he's got is his bicycle, and he's got a little boat with a little tiny outboard motor on it, and he goes out fishing, by himself. Excuse me, at sunset, which is an incredibly gorgeous scene down there in the Keys. It was famous, but that was his whole world, and all of a sudden it sort of gets turned upside down, and because of where he is at either the wrong or the right place at the right time, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I love the scenes of Wrecker out on the water, just like, clearing his head, and enjoying like he's somebody who feels like more at home on the water than he does on land, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, in the opening where he's out there fishing by himself, just wants to be left alone in this giant speedboat. We call them go fasts or cigarette boats. And they were really developed as offshore racing boats, and then were adopted by the drug trade because they were so fast that the Coast Guard couldn't catch them back in the day. And he sees one of those go by all glittery and fast, and it just then crashes right into a tidal bank, and he's not floating off anytime soon. But I've seen that happen. Most of us who spent a lot of our childhoods on the water have watched that unfold. Usually we clap when we see it. Excellent, nice job.
Nice job.
And somebody always wants you to tow them off, and they're in a boat that weighs 4 tons, and you're in this little tiny skiff, and you go, oh yeah, I'll tow you. But that's a scene that a lot of kids in Florida could relate to, and I certainly could from my own childhood.
Yeah. We found some kid readers in Key West just to make sure it sounded true, and they were like, yeah. I know. Exactly. I know. Well, I love how you combine, like the, kind of the grittier aspects of life, and also the beautiful leisure of the place. I really appreciate how you kind of don't try to sugarcoat things for kids. You never talk down to kids. You kind of show the world in all its crummy, crooked ineptitude, but you also give us characters who care and who are just fighting the good fight for what it is. So I feel like I always leave your book feeling like both wiser to the ways of the world, and also like I can do something about it, like they're very positive feeling in the way.
Well, yeah, and me, I'm such a feel-good guy. I'm so, Norwegians are famous for being high-spirited and positive, but I do think, we've talked about this before, and going back to Hoot, which was a book, and that was a story about those little owls. It's sort of ripped right out of my own childhood, and that was the first book for young readers. Dummy, you were the one who said, whatever you don't write down to them. But in my own childhood, the story of those owls didn't end. It ended very sadly. But when you write fiction, you get a crack to rewrite the ending and make it end any way you want it to. So for me, it was selfish because, okay, I'm going to write this story, and this time the good guys are going to win, and the birds are going to be okay. So I'm not sure that's a literary decision, but if for me, it felt good to do it.
Yeah, I know. And I love, of course, how in the kids' books, it's always a kid who manages to, like, thwart the bad guys, make a better decision. Kids getting the better of adults is always great fun. So
And when you think about it, even though all people ask me about why, first of all, why would anyone let you write a children's book is the first question I get asked. And then the second one is says, well, what qualifies you to do it? And I said, well, first of all, I'm not emotionally that far from adolescence, even at my age. But second of all, in the newspaper business, especially writing a column, as I did for, I don't know, I wrote the column for 36 years or something. I said, basically all I did every day was make fun of grownups in the news. I mean, because grownups do stupid things. The newspapers would be out of business if grownups didn't do stupid things. I said, so I took that mentality to the books, and kids love it when they read about grownups doing stupid things because they watch us doing these things all the time in real life. It wasn't that big a leap for me. I didn't feel like it was that hard a transition to make.
I know. I remember one of the first reviews of Hoot cracked me up because it said, it was surprising to see you writing for kids. And then they're like, but thinking about it, there's always kind of a 12-year-old cackle going on in the background in Hiaasen book. And I'm like,
yeah,
fair point.
Yeah, I mean, probably will all be reevaluated now because of the Florida's new regime of purging books and including Amanda Gorman's poem and all this other. I mean, it's very distressing to all of us, but at the same time, it's ludicrous. And I've had books. I can't say banned. I had a book banned from the Texas prison system because they thought it'd be a bad influence on inmates. I was more almost as proud of that as I was of the Newbery. I thought it would wake up a bad influence on prisons, and it was a book about bass fishing. It was a satirical book. I don't know how they thought I could corrupt the prison. So I've been dealing with it. I mean, I get clips occasionally about it, but now it's in full storm here where I live too, in Indian River County, and it's quite it's actually galvanized a lot of very sensible parents who are now showing up at the school board meetings to have little chats with it's usually the Moms for Liberty come. There's usually only one in the county, and that's who's there. So, but it's a battle that needs to be fought over and over again. As you know, it never goes away.
Well, I'm glad to hear that's there are people fighting back. So we're with them.
With you. No, you're all right in the middle of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, it's fascinating. I love how, I think in reading Wrecker, the whole last third of the book, when you kind of see it, all the events kind of tumble out and Wrecker finds his way out of the mess. I think the last third, I was just like, yes, do it. Had nothing to is that do you know where you're going when you're writing, or
I have no idea?
No. Yeah.
No,
so
I don't.
It must be incredibly satisfying when you figure out how you're going to get out of it. No.
It's usually what you and I have talked about. You know better than to stop asking what's going to happen next, because I don't know. And I forget the great writer, and I forget with Nepal or someone who said, for him, writing was like driving with your headlights on. You only see as far as the headlights go, and you don't know what's coming over the hill around the bend. And that's kind of how I write. So, but I usually get about 2/3 of the way through, and then I see, okay, this is who's going to be standing at the end, and this is who's and Elmore Leonard, who was a really good friend of mine, and I was at an event with him one time, and they Mr. Leonard, some guy that had read all 600 of his books or something, said, do you know how your books end when you start? And he goes, well, why would I write them if I knew how they were going to end? And that's the best answer I can give too, because it's got to be fun. I mean, it can't be like you're locked into it. I wish I was organized enough to do an outline, and it would be easier because but it's more fun when the characters, all of them surprised me. The character Valdez and Willie, all of these characters ended up doing things on a page that I maybe didn't think they were going to do. And it takes you a little different directions. And it's like real life. None of us have a script. I mean, none of us, our lives are scripted, you know?
So it must, I mean, I know. I mean, you ever writing along and thinking, how am I going to get out of this? You know?
Oh, yeah, no, it's agony. I asked yesterday, I asked to do a Zoom with a writing class. And I almost just came out and said, don't do it the way I do it. Whatever you do, don't do this, because it is like walking on a highway. You don't know how in the world does this even make sense? And, you know, these characters, they live in your head. You know, you can stop writing and go do something with your family, but they're alive in your head, and they're torturing you the whole duration of the manuscript. So it's nice to finally get it in order where you think, okay, I see the way out. I see how this is going to go. But I had never been able to do an outline or have any plan whatsoever. I think it's either laziness or just disorganization. I'm not sure which.
Well, it's working for you, so we won't worry about it. I know. There's a question that came in from the audience that I think is actually interesting to talk about. And they're asking, do you find yourself being more cautious in writing with all the state bans coming out? You know, like,
no,
I feel like there's a lot more criticism, and like, yeah,
you read the book.
Back. Yeah.
You read the book. Did I seem more cautious to you?
No.
No.
If anything, the opposite. Yeah.
No. I mean, I think if anything, over the years, I've become more, you know, mindful of people's feelings, but never with regard to politics or the Constitution or the right, or, you know, the unvarnished truth. And I think kids see right through it if you're, like you said, sugarcoating it or stepping around or being dainty about something, because that's not how they talk to each other, and that's not how they see things. And so in that sense, you have to remain honest to it. And some of the topics are difficult. And but I don't, there are things that I know that I'm not qualified to write about it, and I wouldn't try. And I certainly wouldn't make them an object of satire. There are certain subjects that just, I don't care how you come at them, they're not funny. And they're not something you want to have, you know, you just can't make them humorous. But I think in terms of what's going on now, I think the worst thing you can do, I mean, it's like Judy Blume has been dealing with this for her whole writing career, and she's back in the middle of it. And I'm quite sure she hasn't changed her attitude or her style of writing one bit. And I think that would be the tragic thing, when people start backing down and saying, oh my gosh, you know, this is gonna, they're going to be afraid to put this in the school. They're afraid to you can't live with yourself like that. It's not, you want it to stand up. You know, you want the book to stand on its own, and they'll find it. Your readers will find it. I mean, I've often fantasized, but I'm just probably wouldn't go over big with the retailers, but if there was a particular school that had banned a book, I would just buy boxes of them, and I would put them out in the parking lot where the school buses are, and I just say free books and give them away at the end of the class. Let everyone have one that way, you know. I'd dress like Ron DeSantis. I'd put on a suit that was really way too big, the same little tie, you know. But you know, I haven't changed. I don't know what it's like for writers starting out, whether they're now going in more. I can't speak for them, but I just know that I'm not going to get any more careful. I think this is not a time to do that right now. You know?
Yeah. I know. I've been curious, like, you know, you retired the column a few years ago, and I wonder if you ever, you know, are there things happening that you're just like, ugh, wish I could write about that? Or is it?
Well, look at the arraignment and
a lot of news coming out of Florida, Carl.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I mean, almost every day I see something and I think, God, I kind of wish I had a column to do that in, and done a little bit of freelancing. But I have to say, honestly, I was with the newspaper for, I think 46 years, that's enough. I mean, God, that's something's wrong with me. That's way too long. And I'm enjoying just concentrating on the novels. I have to say that, yeah, I get pissed off enough to write a column if I want to go do that, and they would print it if I wanted to go do it. But I think there's other voices, there's other people that are feeling the same thing now, and there's a lot of noise on the internet, and I just feel like I really, at this point, I would like to just focus on the novels, and I'm writing the same number of days that I wrote before, which is every day. And that hasn't changed. It's just that I don't have a day when I do the newspaper column. But sure, I mean, anybody who writes in Florida, the material is unbelievable, and you either laugh or cry at it. But and we have all until this election cycle, to be tortured down here.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's that, but then there's also like, seaweed coming at you. Like
Seaweed, the sea level is rising, and the hurricanes are getting worse, and all that's happening. So I don't know. I thought about Vermont or Maine somewhere, but I would freeze in July in those places. Yeah, I couldn't do it.
I don't think so, Carl. No, I know. I mean, you have certainly done a good job of, both, making me want to see these places and making me never want to go to the state.
I swear.
Are you trying to help tourism or hurt, Carl? What do you think?
Well, I think in this book, in Wrecker, I'm afraid I might have made Key West more appealing. I mean, selfishly, that the last thing they're going to kill me. The last thing we really want are more tourists, right? If you're a Floridian, that's kind of the last thing you want. But on the other hand, it is a cool place, and people go there for the right reasons, and it's still beautiful. And you can still be out in a boat, and a school of dolphins comes by, and there's manatees swimming around, and I mean, you see all that was there so many thousands of years ago, and it's pretty cool, and it's a cool place to bring your kids for that. I wouldn't necessarily take them to Duval Street on a Friday night, maybe not, but I don't go there either on a Friday.
You can go hang out in the cemetery with the iguanas and stuff.
I did go by there last time we were down there. We went by there at night. We were walking. You can't get in, but there are a couple places I think you can. You're not supposed to, but I just thought, I think I've seen enough of this, And I do have a video of the iguanas in the cemetery. They live under the gravestones in the tombs, and it's creepy. You walk up to them, and you see a tail disappearing under these old broken. I'll send you the video.
Yeah,
I'll put it on my social media.
That's good,
Anyone
yeah.
that really has a burning desire to see a giant reptile crawling under somebody's grave.
Oh, don't we? We all do.
Yeah,
yeah.
Who doesn't? Everybody like that? Oh my God.
Oh, for sure. I know. I mean, yeah. So like, in typical Hiaasen fashion, Valdez's job is to like clean the iguana poop off of a gravestone. You're like,
yeah, he gets hired. There's a young woman who had died tragically, and her brother, who was older now, had hired him, paid him to go in there and clean the gravestone, because iguanas, they do poop. They have no respect for the human dead. So he'd sneak in the cemetery. That's where we sort of meet. He'd sneak in the cemetery at night to clean off and make her headstone as pristine as he could. And because if you're there and you have a loved one there and you're walking around, the first thing you think is, well, who took a crap on the grave? And then a giant lizard there.
Yeah.
And you can't really do anything about them. They just don't listen. So I thought it would be it's a good job for a teenager. It's character building, don't you think?
Definitely.
Yeah. Kind of job I would have had. I worked at a daycare center as a janitor when I was in middle school. Oh, that was fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
I'd rather be in the graveyard scraping off the iguana.
Yeah, I know. Well, it does allow me to use the phrase iguana poop in copy,
Yeah,
which
how often
is a new thing for me. Yeah.
how
Carl,
often
the joys of working with Carl.
Yeah, who else?
I know. Oh, thank you so much, Carl. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. Like,
Oh, it was fun. It was great seeing you.
yeah. Are there any other comments from the questions, or am I wrapping it up?
They're numb. They're
We're
stunned by
good.
this
They're done. They're
conversation. They
stunned.
have no questions. It's lunchtime and they're all feeling queasy, so they
Exactly.
don't
I
have any
know.
questions.
Well, we'll let them talk about some other books now.
All
You
right.
know,
Thanks
maybe.
for having me on this webinar, it's called.
Yes, yes. It was fantastic to
All
have you.
right.
Thank you so much. Okay.